Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys about something that doesn't get promoted enough and popularized enough in the internet fitness world, and that is the fact that big compound movements and focusing on and mastering big, basic, heavy exercises actually is the key to long-term muscle growth. And people have these weird ideas that somehow you can train separately for strength and for size for people who aren't using very large amounts of drugs. And the reality is that just isn't true. And every coach on earth who has worked with lots of athletes, irrespective of the endeavor, has noted this over the years. And what do we know from all the available research when it comes to actually gaining size? That workload, the amount of work that a muscle does in a training session, is what determines how much growth you stimulate. That isn't subject to debate. That is not a controversial statement. That's not a controversial statement at all. Virtually every expert in the field of exercise science, even the ones who study and care about and primarily focus on muscle hypertrophy as their area of expertise, people who have their PhDs in that, who've studied it in hundreds, if not thousands of test subjects, all agree on that. Workload is the primary factor in determining how much muscle growth you stimulate. Well, when you start thinking about it in terms of workload and programming, it starts to make sense that strength and size aren't separatable. Now, we have certain studies out there that look at a couple of things. There have been studies that looked purely on isolation movements in a short period of time that showed really lightweight with really, really high reps produced just as much muscle growth as more moderate training, right? For short periods of time on isolation movements. But what is it that we know is required to stimulate new additional muscle growth? Increased workload. Increased workload over time. It has to be increased if you want to see sustained gains, meaning you don't want to see a muscle grow for 6 to 8 weeks and then stop growing. No one's interested in doing that. At least no one that I know of. People who follow YouTube fitness or who look for workout programs, they don't care about that. They want the muscle to keep growing for a year. They want their muscles to keep growing for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. That's usually the case. They don't want to stop growing. And when it comes to very high rep training, we know that's the case. We know that you tend to plateau out at a certain point, probably 6 weeks, 8 weeks, you plateau out, and it becomes very difficult to progress from there. We know that on isolation movements in general, you plateau relatively quickly. Usually 6 weeks, 8 weeks, pretty similar. But we have found that we can put noobs in the gym on big compound movements and they can gain strength linearly for 9 months or a year sometimes. And with that strength comes more size. And so here's where I'm kind of going with this and what I want people to understand. And I'll break this down very succinctly for everyone. When you start looking at some of these smaller exercises, you can't sustain them, particularly with lightweight. You can't keep increasing the workload for long periods of time. And if you can't increase the workload, they don't stimulate any new additional growth beyond which that which they've already stimulated. Now they'll help you keep what you have. They might not stimulate more unless it's on top of a larger training stimulus and they're at the end of it. Well, what we come to is that we also know that when people lift heavy, if they do the same volume, again, multiple studies confirming this, what happens? The people who lift the heavier weights gain the same muscle mass, but they get stronger. This is for short periods of time. And it's interesting that people don't ever extrapolate these studies out and run them for a year. Because, yeah, we'll see in a study like that, and it makes sense, okay, for 8 weeks, if we have someone do 7 sets of 3 and someone else do 3 sets of 10, they gain about the same amount of muscle. The group who train with the 7 triples gets a little stronger. That also makes sense. They're using a heavier weight. And if you're gaining the same muscle but lifting a heavier weight, you are probably going to get a little bit stronger. Not going to be twice as strong. It's not going to be something crazy. But they are going to get a little stronger because even 10 rep sets increase your 1 rep max. Everyone knows that. Everyone agrees on that. But what we need to be thinking in terms of is long-term progression. The stronger you can continue to get, the more workload you are capable of generating. In other words, if we took a training program and we got two identical twins, their max squat up. We got one of them by doing a bunch of 10 rep sets. We got his max squat to 275. And we got the other one's max squat to 315 using 3 rep sets, and they gained about the same muscle, running a similar program like that. They're at the same size now, but one of them is slightly stronger. He's not a lot stronger. He's a small amount stronger. Let's say even it was only 285 or 295 versus 315, so only 20 pounds difference. The guy with a 20-pound heavier squat with the same amount of muscle probably has a higher 5 rep max and a 10 rep max too, doesn't he? Yeah, that's usually how it works. The strength transfers the other direction too. That person is capable of generating more workload on that exercise than the guy who's slightly weaker. Therefore, he's capable of, in the next phase, the longer period, subjecting the muscles involved to a little more work. Well, what do we know is the primary driving factor for hypertrophy? The amount of work you can subject a muscle to, the workload. Furthermore, we know that big compound movements can, over time, be trained longer. Single joint exercises and really high rep exercises, you plateau out a lot quicker on your progression. It's hard to progress on them. Strength training can be progressed almost indefinitely with big barbell movements. There are people who still continue to gain strength on them, sometimes at 9 years, 10 years. It's very small amounts, but they're still gaining strength. So if you're really seeking maximum overload of the muscles, you're going to get there better with big movements. And then we have the exercise economy end of it. A lot of guys will be like, well, I want this muscle and this muscle to get bigger. And I would ask the question, do you really think curls stimulate the biceps more than weighted chin-ups? Do you really believe that? Well, it doesn't matter what whatever pro bodybuilder does, because all those pro bodybuilders are on a ton of drugs. They do 37 different exercises, so you don't know which exercises are really giving them the results. And then most of them are injecting stuff directly in their biceps too, because even their training and drugs aren't making their biceps big enough. At a certain point, that shouldn't be your reason for doing it. We've got some studies, the only studies that have ever closely looked at it, and I'm not saying it's definitive, but it's evidence leaning in that direction, that chin-ups work your biceps slightly more than almost all types of curls do. We have studies showing that lat pull-downs in noobs put more size on their biceps than curls did. We have another study showing that if people did, one group just did lat pull-downs and another group did lat pull-downs plus curls, they both gained the same amount of muscle. The curls didn't even add more muscle to their biceps after doing the lat pull-downs. So let me ask you a question. Do you really think, let's say you wanted to maximally develop your back, your biceps, and all of that region, upper back, middle back, the entire back, and your biceps, that if you got as strong as possible on, say, your deadlifts and your chin-ups, do you think that your back and biceps could possibly not reach their maximum potential? Versus coming in and doing 3 different cable exercises for your back, 3 different isolation movements for your biceps, maybe having to do extra exercises for your traps, maybe your upper traps and some of your shoulder girdle up there might not grow enough. But what happens if you go and master the power clean too? Okay, so let's say you have mastered the deadlift, the weighted chin up, and the power clean. And you get as strong as you possibly can on them. Your back, your whole upper back, your shoulder girdle, other than maybe the delts, but there's other exercises for those, and your biceps are probably going to be about as big as they're possibly going to get, but you're going to be stronger, you're going to be more functional, and you're going to be more athletic for it. And you're going to have a lot of other muscles that grew as a result of that also. In other words, mastering those 3 big exercises is going to make not only those muscles that you might have had to do 5 or 6 different smaller exercises for, if not 7 or 8, are going to be just as big, but they're going to be stronger, but then you're going to get carryover to all over your body. Those 3 exercises are going to put muscle all over the place, and that's just looking at 3 big movements. What happens if you select 5 or 6 big compound movements, big barbell or weighted body weight exercises, and you master them and you focus really, really hard on them and you develop them, do lots of workload with them? What muscle in your body is not going to reach close to its genetic limit? It's not possible that they won't, because every muscle in your body, as long as you give it sufficient workload with that stuff, is going to get big. But how much stronger, how much thicker, how much more athletic are you going to be for doing it? So you'll probably not only get bigger a little bit faster while having to learn fewer exercises and less playing around in the gym, but you will probably be dramatically stronger and more athletic for it. There's fringe benefits to it on top of that, even if your goal is hypertrophy. So again, the point is, big, heavy compound movements, if you master them and get really good at them, will absolutely give you the most bang for your buck in putting size on your body, because you cannot separate size and strength in any given individual. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.